There is a decision you made today that nobody saw. Maybe it was the extra 10 minutes you spent scrolling instead of starting. Maybe it was the small promise you made to yourself last week that quietly dissolved by Wednesday. You have told yourself you are waiting for motivation, waiting for the right moment, waiting for life to feel less heavy before you begin. But somewhere underneath that waiting, you already suspect the truth. The moment was never missing. Something else was. Most people spend their lives searching for a secret that will finally unlock the life they want. They read the books, they watch the videos, they collect the quotes, and still nothing moves, not because the wisdom was wrong, but because the real secret was never hidden in a stranger's words. It was hidden in the ordinary minutes when no one was watching. The minutes after the video ends, the minutes before the alarm goes off, the minutes when you are tired, alone, and nobody would ever know if you gave up quietly. That is where almost everyone loses the life they were capable of living, and that is exactly where this begins. Perhaps you have noticed a strange pattern in your own life. You feel inspired in the evening, certain that tomorrow will be different, and then tomorrow arrives looking exactly like yesterday. You are not lazy, you are not broken, but somewhere inside you, a quieter voice keeps making the real decisions, and that voice has not yet been convinced that change is worth the discomfort. Sometimes the mind confuses comfort with safety, even when comfort is slowly costing you the future you claim to want. You may find yourself checking your bank balance and feeling a familiar tightness in your chest, followed by the same old thought that money has never come easily to people like you. You may find yourself starting a new habit with real enthusiasm, only to abandon it the first time life gets difficult, and then quietly deciding that you are simply not the kind of person who finishes things. These thoughts do not arrive as loud declarations. They arrive as small, tired whispers, repeated so often that they eventually stop sounding like opinions and start sounding like facts. There are moments when you feel far behind people your age, watching their progress from a distance while your own life feels paused. There are moments when you feel spiritually disconnected, going through days on autopilot, rarely still enough to hear your own thoughts clearly. And there are quiet nights when you lie awake replaying old mistakes, wondering if the version of your life you once imagined has already slipped past you. None of this makes you weak. It makes you human. But it does explain why so many people stay in the same place for years while quietly believing they are trying their hardest. The secret that 99% of people ignore is not complicated, and that is precisely why it gets overlooked. It is simply this. Your life is shaped far less by what you do when someone is watching, and far more by what you do when no one is. The version of yourself who exists in private, unseen, and unmeasured is the version building your future, one small decision at a time. Public effort earns applause. Private discipline earns transformation. Most people chase the applause. Very few protect the discipline. Consider what this actually means. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself when it would have been easier to break it, you are not just completing a task. You are sending your own mind evidence that you can be trusted. Every time you choose the harder, quieter action instead of the easier, louder distraction, you are quietly rewriting what you believe you are capable of. This is not about becoming a different person overnight. It is about accumulating small proofs, day after day, until a new identity becomes undeniable, even to yourself. Ignoring this principle does not look dramatic. It looks ordinary. It looks like snoozing the alarm one more time. It looks like postponing the difficult conversation. It looks like spending money you meant to save because nobody would notice either way. None of these choices feel significant in the moment, but repeated enough times, they become the architecture of an entire life. The opposite is also true. Small, disciplined choices repeated quietly and consistently eventually become impossible to ignore because they show up as a completely different life. This principle touches your finances because financial stability is rarely built through a single dramatic decision. It is built through the private choice to track an expense you would rather not look at, to delay a purchase you cannot yet afford, to keep showing up for work you do not love while quietly building skills for work you eventually will. It touches your emotional life, because peace is rarely found in a single breakthrough moment. It is found in the private decision, made again and again, to pause before reacting, to breathe before speaking, to choose calm over chaos even when chaos feels more familiar. It touches your spiritual life as well, because faith is rarely proven in public declarations. It is proven in the quiet, unseen moments of trust, when circumstances have not yet changed, but you choose stillness instead of panic anyway. There was a man named Daniel who worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse on the edge of a mid-sized town. He was 34 years old, and for most of his adult life he had believed a simple, quiet story about himself. He believed he was someone things happened to rather than someone who shaped what happened. He would clock in at 10 at night, move boxes until dawn, drive home as the sky turned pale gray, and sleep through most of the daylight hours. His paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, not because he spent recklessly, but because he never really looked at where it went. Looking closely felt too uncomfortable, so for years he simply did not. Daniel used to tell himself that people who built savings, started businesses, or changed careers had something he did not have: better luck, better timing, a better starting point. He was not lazy. He worked hard, physically, every single night, but he had quietly accepted that hard physical labor was simply his life, and he stopped imagining that anything beneath the surface could shift. His private thought, repeated almost nightly during long, silent hours moving boxes under fluorescent lights, was some version of, "This is just how it is for people like me." The turning point was not dramatic. One evening before his shift, Daniel sat in his car in the warehouse parking lot and, almost out of restlessness rather than hope, opened a notes app on his phone and wrote down every expense he could remember from the past month. It took less than 15 minutes. There was no lightning bolt of clarity, no sudden emotional collapse. There was only a quiet, uncomfortable recognition that a surprising amount of his income disappeared on small, forgettable purchases he barely remembered making. He did not overhaul his entire life that week. He made one small decision. Before his shift each night, he began writing down every dollar he expected to spend the next day. Some nights it took 2 minutes. Some nights he skipped it entirely and felt a familiar flicker of failure the next morning. But he kept returning to it, not because he suddenly believed he would become wealthy, but because completing that small task made him feel, for the first time in a long while, slightly more in control of his own days. Weeks passed. He began noticing patterns he had never consciously seen before: small subscription charges he had forgotten about, the accumulating cost of takeout on nights he was too tired to think about dinner. He canceled 2 subscriptions. He began packing a simple dinner instead of buying one on the way to work. None of these decisions were impressive on their own. None of them would make an interesting story if told separately, but together, quietly, month after month, they began to add up. There were setbacks. One month, an unexpected car repair wiped out nearly everything he had managed to save, and Daniel felt the old familiar voice return, telling him this was proof that saving money was pointless for someone in his position. He almost stopped tracking expenses altogether that week. Instead, tired and frustrated, he simply wrote the repair cost into his notes and kept going the next day. It was a small, unremarkable decision, and it turned out to be the decision that mattered most, because it proved to him that a setback did not have to become a surrender. Nearly a year later, Daniel had built a small emergency fund, modest by most standards, but the first real savings he had held onto in his adult life. He had also, almost accidentally, developed a habit of watching short tutorials on basic logistics software during his lunch breaks, first out of boredom, later out of genuine curiosity. When a coordinator position opened at his warehouse, requiring exactly the kind of software familiarity he had been quietly learning, he applied without much expectation. He got the position. The pay increase was modest. The real change was internal. Daniel no longer thought of himself as someone things simply happened to. He had become, slowly and privately, someone who made things happen, one unremarkable decision at a time. Perhaps some seasons of your life are not asking you to move faster. Perhaps they are asking you to become quieter, still enough to finally notice what your own patterns have been trying to show you all along. There is an old understanding present in nearly every wisdom tradition across history that clarity rarely arrives in noise. It tends to arrive in silence, in stillness, in the space after the striving stops for just a moment. Picture a room before sunrise, dim and quiet, the kind of stillness that exists before the world fully wakes. In that stillness, there is no applause, no audience, no proof required. There is only you and whatever is true underneath the noise of your ordinary day. Many people avoid this kind of silence because silence tends to surface the very questions they have been outrunning. But avoidance does not remove the question. It only postpones the answer. There is a quiet law that many spiritual traditions return to in different language. Trust is not the absence of effort. It is the willingness to act with integrity in the present moment without demanding to see the entire outcome in advance. Surrender does not mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing the exhausting illusion that constant anxiety is somehow producing control. You can release the panic without releasing the discipline. In fact, releasing the panic often makes the discipline sustainable for the first time. If you carry a faith tradition, this may resemble prayer, the quiet act of bringing your fears into stillness rather than carrying them alone. If you do not, this may simply resemble presence, The discipline of returning attention to what is actually within your control today rather than everything that is not. Either way, the invitation is the same. Stop demanding certainty before you are willing to act with integrity. This is also where quiet, grounded self-motivation must enter, because reflection alone does not move a life forward. Nobody else can consistently make your private decisions for you, not on the nights you are exhausted, not on the mornings motivation has quietly vanished, not during the long, invisible stretch where effort continues but results have not yet appeared. That stretch is where most people quietly stop, convinced that their effort has failed when in reality, results were simply still accumulating beneath the surface. You may be someone who feels they have already lost years to hesitation, distraction, or fear. That loss is real, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But regret only becomes useful when it turns into responsibility rather than punishment. You cannot recover the years already spent waiting. You can only decide what the next ordinary Tuesday will contain. Nobody requires you to fix your entire life tonight. You are only required to stop unconsciously repeating what has quietly been hurting you. I am learning to trust disciplined action more than temporary emotion. I no longer confuse comfort with safety. I keep the promises that slowly rebuild my self-respect. I am capable of beginning again, even after long periods of hesitation. My private decisions are shaping a future I have not yet seen. History offers a striking example of this same principle, found in the story of Ernest Shackleton, the polar explorer whose ship Endurance became trapped and eventually crushed by pack ice in the Antarctic in the early 20th century. What made Shackleton remarkable was not simply the eventual survival of his entire crew, remarkable as that was, but the quiet, unglamorous discipline he maintained during the long, monotonous months of waiting on the ice, when no dramatic action was possible at all. He maintained routines, he protected morale through small, consistent rituals, he made steady, unspectacular decisions during a period with no applause, no certainty, and no guaranteed outcome. Historians studying his leadership often point not to a single dramatic rescue moment, but to this sustained, private discipline during uncertainty as the true foundation of what allowed his crew to endure. The lesson is not that you will face Antarctic ice. The lesson is that endurance is rarely built in the dramatic moment. It is built in the long, quiet stretch beforehand, when discipline is the only available action. There is an old story, told in different forms across many cultures, about a young apprentice who carried water each morning from a distant well to his teacher's small house. For years, the apprentice complained privately that his work was meaningless, unseen by anyone, contributing nothing to his own growth. One day, his teacher asked him to look closely at his own hands and forearms, made strong and steady after years of carrying heavy buckets along uneven ground. The apprentice had believed his years of carrying water were simply delay, time spent waiting for real training to begin. His teacher explained gently that the carrying had always been the training. The unseen years had quietly built exactly what would later be needed. Sometimes what feels like waiting is actually preparation, disguised as delay because its purpose has not yet been revealed. Beneath all of this lies a deeper mechanism worth understanding honestly. Your mind does not simply store information, it forms patterns through repetition, and those patterns quietly shape what you notice, what you avoid, and how quickly you give up when something becomes difficult. This is not a mystical claim. It is a psychologically grounded one. A person who repeatedly tells themselves they are bad with money often stops paying close attention to money altogether because the identity itself feels already settled, making improvement feel pointless before it even begins. A person who repeatedly proves to themselves through small, consistent action that they can be trusted gradually begins protecting even minor commitments because breaking them would now feel inconsistent with who they have quietly become. This means the goal is never simply to chase a different life from the outside. The deeper goal is to practice becoming the kind of person capable of sustaining that life once it arrives. A sudden windfall rarely transforms someone whose internal identity has not changed, which is why so many dramatic financial gains disappear just as quickly as they arrived. But a modest income, managed by someone whose identity has genuinely shifted toward discipline and self-trust, tends to grow steadily, quietly, and sustainably over time. I release the identity that no longer serves who I am becoming. I am someone who follows through even when no one is watching. I trust the slow, steady evidence of small, consistent action. If you feel ready to explore this work more deeply, there may be something below that can quietly support your next step. Here is one honest, simple action you can take within the next day. Choose one small promise, something specific and modest, something you could realistically keep for the next 7 days. It might be 5 minutes of quiet reflection before checking your phone each morning. It might be writing down every expense for 1 week without judging yourself for what you find. It might be a short walk each evening to think clearly before reacting to the day's stress. Choose only one. Write it down somewhere you will actually see it. The importance is not in the size of the action. The importance is in what keeping it quietly proves to yourself, evidence that your word to yourself still means something. That evidence is the actual foundation everything else will eventually be built upon. I no longer wait for motivation before I begin. I trust the quiet decisions no one else will ever see. I am becoming someone I can rely on. You do not need to transform your entire life tonight. Almost no one does that, and the ones who try usually collapse under the weight of their own unrealistic expectations within a matter of weeks. What you actually need is smaller and far more achievable. You need to stop unconsciously repeating the private decisions that have quietly been working against you, and begin in some small way, tonight or tomorrow morning, choosing differently. If your discomfort tonight began with a feeling of fear about the future, let that fear soften slightly now, not because everything is suddenly certain, but because you understand something you did not fully understand before. Fear often protects an outdated version of you, a version that no longer has to be in charge of your decisions. If your discomfort began with feeling behind in life, let that feeling loosen its grip as well, because time spent unaware is not the same as time wasted beyond repair. What matters now is simply the next quiet, private decision you choose to make. If your discomfort tonight began with financial anxiety, remember that stability was never going to arrive through panic. It arrives through small, steady, unremarkable choices, repeated with patience, long after the excitement of starting has faded. And if your discomfort began somewhere in your sense of identity, in a quiet suspicion that you have been living as someone smaller than who you actually are, know that identity is not fixed. It is built slowly through the private evidence you choose to create for yourself, one ordinary day at a time. Somewhere tonight, quietly, unseen by anyone, you have another chance to keep a small promise to yourself. Take it, become steady.